I guess we're settled more or less. 15 minutes is a little relative concept in Serbia. I assume some other people will be coming in as we begin, and I already see some of them doing that. So that's, hopefully we'll have a larger audience. I have to say that before we start, that I'm glad that we managed to get a different time slot, because our time slot usually was late at night, and I used to call it the late night show, and now we managed to move this to high noon, no analogies with the Western, to 12 o'clock, hoping that this would be, and certainly for our guests, this is a better slot. I'm just hoping that this will be more attended. But anyway, so here we are at a new time slot, and I hope it stays that way in the future. We have our guests here today. The panelists will be obviously the well-known Ambassador FABRIZI of the European Union, Ambassador LUTTEROTTI Nikolaus of Austria, Thomas SCHIEB, who was here before, the German ambassador to Serbia, and Locoscio Carlo, I hope I pronounced that well, the Italian ambassador of Italy. We are going to be discussing something, a theme of the Western Balkans, and it has to do with a question of, is geopolitics really back? And when I say is geopolitics really back, I don't just mean the Balkans. Is geopolitics really back in terms of the European Union and how the European Union sees the world, and number one, and number two, how does it reflect in our part of the world, which is the Western Balkans? And finally, how does this affect the new accession process, or a potentially new model of the accession process for the countries that are candidates or about to be candidates for European accession in the future? Now, before I go on, I also want to inform the audience I have a little new hat here. I have become, in the meantime, the president of the Forum of International Relations of the European Movement in Serbia. That basically means it's, as you know, an organization dedicated to advocating reform in line with accession. So that means I will have to be nice to our ambassadors from the European Union, although there will be some elements of hard talk and some hard questions. Now, before having said this, I want to make just a few comments generally on the European Union and what it means to us, and what a great success the European Union has been. We don't want that to fall by the wayside and be forgotten, so I think we should mention this first before we get into some of the problems that are to be discussed. As you know, after the Second World War, the European Union had tremendous success in pacifying potential class conflict, bringing growth rates. A product of that was the social welfare state, which is a brand of the European Union, how people think of Europe as when they talk about it. It also helped convergence of some of the new countries, and slowly emerged into deeper and deeper and better integration. And I have to stress that I think I don't buy the story how it was a pacification peace process, that type of narrative. I think, but in a real sense, it was a pacification process of potential conflict with a big bang, because when all these countries changed their system overnight and things were falling to pieces, the prospect of the European Union, I think, helped these countries have a focus, a target, and to overcome some potential deep problems they would have had it not been for the European Union. Now, having said that, there was also other aspects of this whole European story, and one of them is told by Tony Judd, the famous late, unfortunately, historian, who in his book, The Post-War, said actually Europe was lucky because of the Cold War. It could not have absorbed the Eastern European countries back then. Its slow integration was historically determined, but very good, and probably the only one of the preconditions for its success. It also talks about how it was under the American shield. It didn't have to worry too much about world problems and getting involved in them. NATO was there, NATO America basically led by the United States. So it was under the umbrella, it had a dividend from that, and it basically was a bipolar world, so it wasn't difficult for the Europeans to make their choice on which side they were on. Now, let's move closer to today, quickly. If you think about somebody, the speaker today was talking about what happened 10 years ago or 50 years ago, kind of inspired me to say a few words about that. You know, in 2008, things looked pretty good, I think, compared to now. And probably we would have not predicted a lot of things. So I have one of my favorite sayings that I coined, but I'm sure somebody else did this before me, was politics, you know, when you say never in politics is 10 years. That's never in politics. And if you think of 2008, somebody, I had told somebody, you know, 10 years from now, we'd have the following situation. We'd have a major crisis of the euro. We'd have Donald Trump as president. You would have the United States dismantling the world order that it helped create to the largest extent. You would have a big populist identity politics crisis within the European Union and on this periphery. And China would be a big player, and Britain would leave the European Union. People would probably tell me, look, you're either drinking too much or smoking something, or you should probably see a shrink, or probably all of the above three, okay? So things have happened that are not predictable, and unfortunately most of these things are not very good. In terms of predictions of here over the Western Balkans, they asked some of the major politicians in 2010 what's going to happen, what's the future by the 220, and most of them said, well, these countries probably will be almost in, or some of them will be in, and some will be very close to being into the European Union. And only Joschka Fischer said, because the French and German engine is not working, they will probably 2030 and maybe later. Okay. So unfortunately, he was right on that one. So now we come to the following. The Munich conference was held last week, 2 weeks ago. I forget the exact date, in February. Doesn't matter. It was the big Munich Security Conference is there. Important people show up, obviously, including presidents and chancellors and vice presidents, and a large part of the United States Congress, and there's discussion. And Wolfgang Ischinger, who's a famous German diplomat, is head of that conference, and he branded this conference Westlessness. It's a new word that you can't find it in the dictionary. It's probably translated from a similar German word. It means basically the lack of the West, the non-presence of the West. And the themes taken up there was, well, you know, the geopolitics came into the forefront. And the geopolitics came to the forefront in the fashion of, on the one hand, skepticism about what the United States is doing, skepticism about the relationship between the United States and Europe, given some of the political events that have occurred since President Trump took office. On the one hand, China. There's a scare of China. And so all of a sudden, it looked like Europe will have to face up to being a real geopolitical actor in between Russia, China, and the United States. And somebody called this the moment of truth for Europe, to find its place in this and how it is going to handle this, because the circumstances are much different than they were only a few years ago. So then the question becomes, can Europe become a geopolitical player? And I will just finish with this. When I was ambassador in the United States, I talked to a lot of people. In the State Department, they won't say this, but when you go and talk to the congressmen a lot, basically their view of Europe was, this is a bunch of rich nations, a club of the rich. We are helping their security. They are not really capable or responsible or don't care enough to participate and take their responsibility in the geopolitical world. And they don't really even conceive Europe as a geopolitical entity. And this is what but we in America see it that way, okay? So this was back then, obviously before Trump, but this was sort of an attitude that I found in a lot of places, including the think tanks. So now the question for Europe becomes, okay, now we can't rely on the United States forever. We disagree with the United States on certain things. Among other things, the United States is undermining certain things like the WTO, the deal with Iran, et cetera, et cetera. What are we going to do and how are we going to do it? So without further ado, I will ask, I took a longer introduction this time around than before, but I'm fortunate to have less guests here, so I'm not going to take time from anybody. So always we start with the highest common denominator of the European Union, and that is Ambassador Sam Fabrizi, and I will address some of these issues.
Well, thank you, Professor. Thank you, Ivan, and thank you all of you for being here. And for me, it's certainly a pleasure to share my thoughts here at the Copa-ONU Forum. You unfolded a number of the big picture, and certainly it will be a little bit a challenge to respond to the many input that you present in front of us. But certainly, if I look at the three main questions, as you said, is the EU a geopolitical power? How this approach would apply to the Western Balkans? How the accession will be unfolded? I would say certainly from the start that for all those who knows a little bit the European Union knows that the European Union was born in reaction of the so-called world politics that proved to be a disaster for Europe and the world in the first half of last century. So basically we have developed and we grew up in a model where the engagement with cooperation was win-win, so the not zero-sum game approach has been in our DNA. We grew up. I think we prosper in an environment where multilateralism was the key words. The EU is a byproduct of the multilateralism. It's also true that during that moment we have developed some policy who had the geopolitical approach, the enlargement. We moved from 6 to a number, we multiplied the number for more than 5. Trade, development. We had the chance to develop policy on a win-win approach with a global outreach. It's also true, as you said, if you look at 2008, this was the Solana, that moment, Javier Solana was the High Representative made, and his strategy was never been a so prosperous period for Europe, for the world. Multilateralism on the rise. We need to continue that way. I mean, we all know that the past decade, a lot of element has changed. You mentioned some of that, the growth of an alternative governance by China, a resurgent unilateralism also in the US, and a number of what happened in Ukraine with Russia, a number of elements who have basically altered the scenario under which the EU was working. I think in that moment the EU has read this element. I think if you look also at the Mogherini strategy in 2016 was talking about in a global Europe. It was not certainly us who were trying to be inward, but we're keeping the channel of multilateralism open. So if you ask me if we are a global player, I would say yes, by definition we are a global player. If you like a geopolitical role, sometimes the definition of geopolitical is a little bit controversial, so we prefer to say that we have a global approach. And certainly what we have to realize, and I think this is maybe the first reply to your question, is to the possibility for us to defend our value of interest. Is not to change our scale of priority. Come back and think that, for example, in the Balkans, stability should prevail over transformation, or democracy versus stability. I think what we need to do is to keep our toolbox of value of interest quite clear, consistent, in a reliant way, what we have to do is our approach. So our policy need to be much more coherent. We need to have a stronger coherence within the system, with the member state, and certainly not to be shy of the leverage we have. We are the largest economy. We are 450 million euro. We have the 50 million people. We have one of the safest and one of the most democratic area and safe area where you can live. Our democracy is strong. So certainly we have a lot of leverage that we have to say. And I think this commission, this new administration in Brussels has been quite clear, quite clear also in using the terminology geopolitics, if you want to say, and say basically we need to stand for our values. Enlargement is a priority for us, so we can certainly define all of this. And we haven't, and the Commission, I would say, they haven't lost very much any momentum. If you look in the first 100 days, a new methodology on the rise, I mean, is strengthening the enlargement process. A very, very important climate posture. Tomorrow, I think we will discuss also with the Minister on environment. And you have a digital agenda. You heard before our Commissioner for Digital Innovation. Digital is an area where the EU want to become the player in the next future. So I would say there is the pressure from outside is forcing us to be more clear, more sharp. We are not changing our scale of values of interest, but certainly we are ready to play our role without any sense of lack of confidence. On the contrary, with the sense that if the multilateralism has to survive, will be mostly thanks to the European Union coherence, stubbornness, and capacity to move. So this is where I will start.
Thank you. I'll give it now. I'll ask the Austrian ambassador to comment, maybe. So we'll go from there and then come to.
Thank you, Ivan. I think, first of all, I can agree with everything that our EU ambassador has already mentioned. We are on this panel. Austria is the youngest EU member state. We are celebrating 25 years of our EU membership this year. And I have to say that if you look at the polls in Austria about whether Austrian people value EU membership and are satisfied with being a member of the European Union, never since 1995, we have done this on a yearly basis, never has it dropped below 50%. So I mean, this is a very clear signal of our population that the European Union is working, and this is the sort of that this is the right thing for us to do. Now, Sam has spoken about the development of the European Union. I think if you look back at, let me just quote one quote of one of the founding fathers, Robert Schuman, when he spoke on 9 May 1950, the European Day. He said, "Europe will not be made all at once or according to a single plan. It will be built through concrete achievements which first create a de facto solidarity." This is how we built Europe, and we are still in the same process. I think Europe is not on an island. It has to develop. It is enlarging. It has had many successful enlargements, and it has to adapt to a world that is changing, and the world is changing a lot. I think it's not only globalization. It's not only sort of a realignment of global power, but it's also the acceleration of life and acceleration of developments that obviously creates an additional challenge. But we, and let me just say this, we are very optimistic, and I think there is reason for optimism for the European Union, and the requiem of the West, the Westlessness that was the catchword at the Munich Security Conference, I think is premature. And also, if you followed a little bit the Munich Security Conference, there was no conclusion that we're living in a world of Westlessness. Maybe we're still living in a world of Westfulness. We will see. But I think the strength of the West is, as Sam has also mentioned, and the strength of the European Union is that we stick to our values. We don't shift our priorities. And maybe the most important thing, in my view, is that liberal democracies have built-in mechanisms to challenge themselves and to autocorrect themselves. And I think this may be viewed as a weakness, but I think in the long term this is our strength, and I truly believe in that.
Thank you. Ambassador Lukashi.
Thank you very much. Well, I think the title of our panel is Geopolitics. Is Geopolitics back to the Balkans? Well, I would say that geopolitics never left the region indeed. I mean, so we are still here, EU member states working quite actively to promote the Western Balkan, and enlargement policy is certainly a very important tool for us. Sometimes I have the impression that some of us tend to forget what we have achieved as European Union in 70 years. I mean, we succeeded in creating a large area of stability and prosperity in Europe. It's not by chance that the European Union is the largest and most successful peace project in the world. And we have created a community based, as our colleagues just pointed out, based on principles and values. And this is certainly an added value for all the policies and all the actions that the EU is taking all around the world. Certainly our approach is always based on dialogue. We are not looking for a confrontation, and we are looking instead for a reasonable compromise. And this is the essence of our work. And as you mentioned also, the Munich conference, I would also like to quote what the new representative Borrell said on that occasion, that you should develop an appetite for power, the willingness to act. We have done a lot. We came a long way. We were just 6 at the beginning. Now we are 27. We have improved quite a lot the way we are working, the way we are coordinating our policy. Maybe we should improve even our assertiveness to become even more effective and to be able to compete on equal foot with the other actors. Having said that, I would like now to make a reference to what we are doing here in the Western Balkans. Because, I mean, we are here, we are still here, we never left the region, despite criticism I heard yesterday. I think that all of us, not only those who are present here today, but also all their partners, do believe that enlargement to the Western Balkans is crucial for keeping stability in the region, to give perspective to all the countries, to promote reforms, and to give chances to all of them to join our community. And for us, this area is of strategic interest. Your stability in the region is our stability. Your prosperity is our prosperity. And if we think just one data, the stronger economic integration already existing between the large majority of the Western Balkan countries and the EU countries tell us a lot about what we have succeeded in achieving together. We need to work in this direction. It is true, as you said at the beginning, we are living through a very difficult conjuncture in the EU, in many EU member states. It's a complicated situation in the region, in some countries in the regions, but both of us, member states and Western Balkan countries, we don't have an alternative to the integration of the countries in the region within the EU. They are saying this very openly. Of course, we know what is the problem. If you ask to the people in the streets, in every capital of the Western Balkans, do you want to join the EU? They will immediately tell you, yes, but they will add immediately, but when? And I think that our problem, our challenge nowadays is in trying to fill the gap between the technicalities, so to say, of the negotiation for accession and the demand that is coming from the countries in the region to become a member of the EU. We are working on that. Maybe we'll come later during discussion to other topics. But certainly the EU is a geopolitical player, is a global player, as Sam pointed out. And in this region, certainly we have a lot at stake for our interest, for interest of our countries, and for the interest and the future of this region. So there is no doubt that we are here, and we will continue to do politics and geopolitics in the region.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me again. Glad to be here. Now, I would like to briefly pick up on your introduction when you mentioned this year's motto of the Munich Security Conference, Westlessness. I guess it was also meant as a kind of a wake-up call, and then of course you can argue, is this needed? Because I think the West, we are now very much aware of what is at stake. So the West is definitely under pressure. The rules and value-based order, as we call it, is under pressure. And I think all these wake-up calls have been heard. Now, last year we celebrated 30 years of the fall of the Berlin Wall, and I think at this time, 30 years ago, there was a lot of optimism that the world would become more peaceful and stable and more democratic. Now, I mean, this is a no-brainer now. It didn't happen, and probably maybe the West was too optimistic, and it took a while before, so to say, listening to the wake-up calls. But the question, or this line, yeah, that the world is in turmoil, is now a couple of years old. So it's nothing. It's not a new phenomenon. You can say, well, it's maybe the situation is getting worse, but it's not really new. And what does it mean? For us, the European Union is clearly, of course, it's a global player. It was a global player in the economic sphere for many years, but now it's also a global player in the international on the international stage, it's so. Especially now, it is important to have the European Union as a factor of stability, of a voice of reason, so to say, as the adult in the room. And this is why it's so important to strengthen the European Union. And what was mentioned by my colleagues before, yes, it has always been difficult. Yeah, there were always challenges. Yeah, the constitutional treaty was not adopted, and it was a struggle. But then the Lisbon Treaty was adopted. But at the same time, the European Union did get bigger. Yeah, we accepted more member states. So this means we are able to learn and to take into account developments and draw the consequences. When the Lisbon Treaty entered into force in 2009, this was the year when the European External Action Service was established, so to say. This is not so long ago. So we are adapting to developments. And now, because this is, again, also a constant, so to say, Well, a question, is it possible to reform and to enlarge at the same time? Yes, we never saw it as a contradiction. The EU always needed to reform, and at the same time, for us, enlargement is also it's a fundamental element of European integration in our view. And this is why and this probably will not come as a surprise. Yeah? For us, it's important to improve the coherence of the European Union, to improve its voice, its leverage on the international stage. And this is also what we will, not overestimating what we will be able to achieve, but during our presidency in the second half of this year, this is definitely something we will work on. And just to mention one example, because yes, coming to your question, geopolitics and power politics, well, for us, multilateralism is key. Yeah, strengthen the multilateral structures, including making the European Union stronger. We have, as an example, we will organize a summit, a full EU-China summit during our presidency, because it is important that, especially vis-à-vis China, the European Union is able to speak with one voice. And I think regarding enlargement and methodology, we will come back to this later. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, let's just quickly just go through that. I'm glad you raised this in the end. China, okay, let me put it this way. Let's look at the global players. The United States, obviously it's quite obvious what has occurred. First, they started a trade war. They undermined the WTO. They are not letting a judge be in appellate court put into the WTO. Basically, WTO is down. They had a problem, including wanting to put tariffs on Europe. Then Juncker came out and said we can do stupid too, and then this kind of went away. But there were fundamental problems with the Iran deal that the European helped to broker. That's out, et cetera, et cetera. And then with a sort of an unclear policy on Russia that the United States has. So let's say I've dealt with the problems that potentially the European Union sees as problems that need to be sorted out with the United States. But what about China and Russia? What are the topics that you see as the most fundamental disagreements that need to be overcome? By the way, the summit was at one point termed 1 in 27, and then it was changed because it kind of looked like the big one is China, and then there's 27 little countries. So now you're having a EU-China summit, which is good, but what's the substance of issues with China and Russia? I don't think that's too known to the public. I think the disagreements with the United States are pretty much all over the press and the media. So maybe we'll start with you, then go this way this time.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's of course not an easy question, but I think. But at the same time, I think it's pretty obvious. We have to, maybe starting with Russia, and also I mentioned a lot of optimism we had years ago. Now Russia is a very important partner, but it's also a difficult partner. Still, of course, we have to cooperate with Russia, and this is what we do. But we would like to do it also in the international fora we have at our disposal. So this is why, I mean, I think everybody knows where we stand. We have, with the annexation of Crimea, of Russia, this is, and then what is going on in eastern Ukraine, this is extremely difficult, and this hampers, of course, the relations and makes the relationship difficult. At the same time, Russia is, of course, a very important global partner in many areas, also in terms of global security, so to say. And this is why it's so important to find ways to cooperate. And China, yes, I mean, rivalry, global rivalry, trade, and we think a trade war, of course, is detrimental to all participants. So this needs to be avoided. So we should use all structures, all international treaty structures, to if there are difficulties, use these structures in order to overcome and to keep the dialogue going. But at the same time, and this is, we are not, I mean, we don't see the world as being a kind of a big zero-sum game. And this is why I think we do not want to return to former times. We say let's try to find solutions which are beneficial for both of us or for the three of us. This is so important. And one last thought which I now have, I think I forgot. I mean, it's, again, it's very obvious that we can only, if we talk to big powers like Russia or China, political leverage is needed. And again, this is so important that we speak within the European Union, that the European Union speaks with one voice and puts all the leverage it has I think this is important.
Anybody else want to comment on this? Please.
No, I think that Thomas said at the end a very important thing. When we have to deal with such important powers, actors on the international scene, the EU has to speak with a single voice. Of course, we know that we cannot agree on everything, and so when we had to shape the EU global strategy, we had first to find common ground. But of course, if what we can see is just the disagreements, I think that we start off on the wrong foot. I mean, it's true, cooperation, dialogue with Russia and China is certainly complicated for a number of reasons, and my German colleague already pointed out. But for each and every international partner, especially with the major powers, there are many dossiers on which we can cooperate, and we have to cooperate. Security, terrorism, trade, energy, and even migration, especially these days. The important thing, as Sam pointed out in his previous intervention, is to define the European interest and safeguard this. So, in our view, direct negotiations and open dialogue, both at the UN level and at the bilateral one, should always be the main instrument to solve international dispute and to find compromises with our partners. I say partners because we don't have to forget that even for us, certainly for Germany, Italy, both Russia and China are important trade partners. So, as I said before, we are for dialogue, we are not for confrontation. We need to work a lot in order to find acceptable and reasonable compromises consistent with our principles and values because, okay, that's true. We are ready to discuss, we are open to dialogue, we are looking for compromise. We don't want to give up our principles and values, which are our main landmark for our actions. So it's a difficult challenge for sure, but I think that we have been so far quite consistent on that. Think about the Ukrainian situation, for example. Putting sanctions to Russia has cost a lot to Italian economy, to Italian companies. The same goes for Germany and German companies, but we are still there. So consistency is always a key of our action when dealing with such powers.
Very quickly, thank you. And I think that the approach is clear. So it's we engage. We have the different forum, the UN. We have this bilateral summit. Happened also in my previous professional life to organize some of them. So basically, we have our own agenda. Again, our scale of interest and values. And we engage with third countries according to this. Of course, we are looking for a positive agenda. Of course, we want to make progress, especially at global level, but we are not shy also to see the differences. If you look, I don't have in front of me the agenda of the next EU-China summit, but there will be certainly trade. We both believe in the openness of trade, how we can regulate investment, how we can move forward and having a WTO that works. At the same time, we will have a very critical dialogue on human rights with China. We have question of governance. We will question cybersecurity. We will make clear that our position is clear. As at 27, we have the necessary leverage to say what we stand for. The same for Russia. Russia, we have is an important partner. Is a neighbor. Is part of this continent. We have point in common in the GPCOA on Iran. We have been working for 10 years with the Russian and the Chinese. But at the same time, on Ukraine, we said they were wrong. We made it clear. We still have sanctions after 6 years. So the point is that the EU is quite a resilient. Maybe we need to be more sharp. Maybe completing the comment I made before. Certainly, we realized there were some part of our toolbox of policies that need to be reinforced. In the past 5 years, we have spoken of defense union, and we never spoke in the past. In the delegation in Serbia, I have the first military attaché of the EU in a country, together with Washington and Serbia. It was something unthinkable a few years ago. So we are sharpening up our toolbox because we are not naive. At the end of the day, we waged a number of wars in the past. So we know what it's about. But certainly we need to strengthen our toolbox, and certainly we can talk with whoever we have to, according to our scale of interest, values, and always looking for a positive agenda. We are not looking for trouble. If you look at the EU, we are a force for good. Climate, migration, digital, trade, donors. You never find someone who is believe in, of course, it's not naivete. As Carlo has said, a stable world means a stable euro, a more prosperous world, the most prosperous Europe. This is certainly is an incorporation of our interest in our values. But certainly we operate with an agenda for good. It's not Samaritan, but it's for good. And certainly, at least within Europe, in the past 60 years, we have ensured an uninterrupted period of peace that we never did in the past. I think this is never to forget.
I think increasing competition between the EU and other powers is evident. You mentioned trade. I think trade is one aspect where the EU can. It is fair to say that the EU is also a superpower in this world, and I think there we show that we can protect our interests. And as somebody coming from a small country, I can only say, this is extremely important to have a strong European Union. But by, global standards, all EU member states are small countries, and small countries. Like institutions, small countries like multilateral institutions, and small countries like a rules-based international order, because it is in our interest. And I think the rules-based international order, this is something where we have to be very careful that this is going to be maintained and defended. And I think the EU is capable of doing it, first by its own example, rule of law within the European Union, positive example, but also the EU has shown that when it is united, it can be very strong, and this is important.
Okay, well, thank you for those thoughts. This is obviously we could talk about this for a long time. It's a big subject, but at least we want to touch on it, not just talk about the Western Balkans. And now we're coming back to talk about the Western Balkans once again. Now, on certain issues, there is one man in the European Union who doesn't see quite things the way that maybe the rest do. And his name is Emmanuel Macron. Okay, so one of the things that he talked about was the resetting, that the policy towards Russia is not working, that something else should be done. That's one of his later statements. Secondly, it is true, like you said, that we're facing certain problems with the way the accession process was going. So there was the French initiative to change the methodology of the accession. It was also a French initiative to change the way the European Union itself works, right? And this is coming up in about 2 years. And he has shown obvious dissatisfaction with some of the backsliding on democracy. So when Ambassador Lutterotti was talking about how, you know, once we get democracy, it's self-corrective, well, it can also backslide into different forms of government that are not democratic anymore. And you see that partly, according to high officials in the European Union, ex-officials and current politicians, to be the case in some of the EU member states. Now, when we talk about the accession process was sort of became a hamster in the wheel. You know, the hamster is a little mouse who's running in the wheel. He stays in the same place. The wheel keeps turning around. Nothing happens. And this goes on and on and on. And as an illustration of this, and obviously I think this is one of the reasons that there is a proposal for change. So I don't know how all this is going to turn out, but I will say personally I'm pretty in line and grateful to President Macron for bringing this whole thing up. Because I will give you, when you give certain numbers on the accession process to the Commission's grades that it gives verbally to countries that are on the path of accession, like well advanced, good level of preparation, moderately, et cetera, and you change this into numbers, and you look at, say, the front runner in the Western Balkans is Montenegro. In 2015, if you add all, the ideal number is 33, which means that you're going down from a high level to 33. When you're 33, you're practically in the European Union. Well, in 2015, it was at 105. And in 2019, it was a 98. Okay, so at that pace, Montenegro, if this is the way Montenegro advances according to what the Commission was giving it grades on, and I'm not blaming the whole problem. Believe me, there are two parts of this. There's the pull of the European Union, and there's the push of the candidates to push really reform. It would take Montenegro 40 years. If you look at it's managed to do 4.5 points in the last 4 years. In Serbia, it went from 103 points to 98.5 between 2015 and 2009. Just reading the grades from how the European Commission deals with this when it does its reports. Now, obviously, the last report was a little more forceful and put some things that should have been said probably earlier or had been said earlier in a more direct way. So now, when you read, now you see that there is a real need for reform. Now, the question becomes, the Commission comes out with this, there's going to be a new model, and it comes with a statement, and it reminds me sort of, you know, of what the communists used to call self-criticism, you know. So it says stuff in here like, we need to build a more trust among stakeholders, the accession process, and make it more effective, more predictable, more credible, more dynamic and subject, et cetera, meaning basically that probably, if you'd have to stress this, that it wasn't that the process was running into these problems the way it was done. So the question then becomes is, how do you see this accession process, which is clustered, more political, more steered, and reversible? And will that really add the dynamics necessary for this process to move along? or not? And one thing that I always hear from your ambassadors or members of the European Union is, well, you're citizen, they all say I want to go to the European Union, but when you look at the polls in Europe, the citizens of the European Union and countries of the European Union don't really want to have further accession. So this is an extra part of a job that somebody else will have to do to convince them to move along in this direction. So in short, the analysis was that countries were sort of trapped in a vicious circle of low expectations and low reform, and now this model is supposed to break it. This is still in discussion, obviously, so this is a hot topic. So some of your governments have a non-paper, I know, a different one from the one that Macron has subject to. Some have different opinions, some are still making up their opinion, I assume. So what is your take right now on this whole new model and approach to the accession process?
Thank you very much, and I try to be brief. Maybe, but let me first say, because this was mentioned a number of times yesterday, enlargement and accession talks with North Macedonia and Albania. So just to say, last year Germany was also disappointed that it didn't happen, so we do hope that it's going to happen, hopefully already in March. On the basis of the new methodology. This is for us currently a clear priority, to get the accession talks with North Macedonia and Albania on track. Now, talking about the methodology, yes, it is important to always improve the methodology. To be honest, we had thought the current one is okay. It is working. I think it has to be clear. I mean, even the best methodology will not work if the political will is not sufficient. So, and I think this is always very important to keep in mind. And we have looked at the Commission's proposal, of course, and we are fine with it. And we don't see a substantial change. There are differences. It should be getting more dynamic. The political steering should be facilitated. This is all fine with us. The clusters is fine. But what is still in the focus, that reforms and the rule of law are of the essence. And this is going to be the same like in the current methodology. So this is why we can fully support the new methodology. So, but again, what I said in the beginning, for us it's a positive decision of the European Council is now important for us. We are fine with this methodology, and we do hope, and we are cautiously optimistic, that this is all going to fall into place in spring. Thank you.
Thank you. As you know, there isn't a stronger supporter of the enlargement policy within the EU member states than Italy. And our Prime Minister, Mr. Giuseppe Conte, was the first one to define an historical mistake, the unhappy outcome of the European Council in October. But we didn't say only that. We immediately took the initiative to exploit that crisis, so to say, and transform it in an opportunity to relaunch the enlargement policy and the discussion among member states. It was thanks to an initiative that enlargement was immediately put back on the agenda in November General Affairs Council. We put forward a non-paper with some ideas. We had an initiative with other like-minded countries in order to ask the Commission to come up with some proposal for the new methodology in order to, let's say, accommodate our ideas, the French ideas, other countries' suggestions. And I think that what the Commission issued a few days ago is a smart compromise. It is clear, as you say, that the aim is to make the accession process more effective and more efficient, in a way to improve it. And for us, it is important to understand that the adoption of this methodology has to go hand in hand with the opening of negotiations with Northern Macedonia and Albania. For us, this will be a key decision for the EU and for the EU policy, not only about enlargement, but also about Western Balkans. Our credibility is at stake, we know this, and we are, as Thomas said, cautiously confident that we will achieve an important result. Having said that, it has to be clear that the accession process is a sort of a joint efforts, a joint venture, better to say. So in the sense that it implies efforts on our side, member states, and efforts on the candidates country, negotiating the accession. If they deliver, we have to be up to what we have promised. But without the reform we were asking for, it would be difficult, even for us, that we are campaigning and supporting very much, for example, Serbia, to support them in Brussels in discussion with our partner. So I would say that after the disappointment generated by the European Council of October, we are back on track. We are not yet there. We have to continue to work with other partners, and we are doing this. And as we said at the beginning, as we are talking about geopolitics, bringing the Western Balkans with the EU is a geopolitical choice for the EU member states, and we are sticking to this objective, strategic objective.
Well, I think the objective is remain the same, is enlargement. Question how we get there, and I think the new methodology is to strengthen the process, to make it, as you said, more, as you quoted the process, to make it more predictable, more political, more dynamic. So there's a little bit of technicalities there. Certainly, with the understanding, the objective is the same as before. It's also clear that enlargement is a unanimity policy. So we need to get the 27 member states on board, which is not always easy. Some member states have expressed need to be reassured that the methodology is the one who really believe make the difference, even though like a country like Germany, they could live with the existing methodology. In any case, this new methodology is out. I think it's pretty clear in the mechanism. It's not reinventing the wheel. We are not changing the fundamental of the enlargement. We remain rule-based, reform-based, so the principles are there. The Commission is certainly hopeful that in March, but in a couple of weeks, the European Council will be able to open negotiation with North Macedonia and Albania on the basis of this revised methodology, but also we are looking at the wider picture. There will be a summit in Zagreb in May where we are looking at how we can address the economic gap between the EU and the Western Balkans. You saw the number before. So how we can reduce this gap, what we can do in terms of economy, what we can do in terms of infrastructure, in a hard but also social, like education, what we can do on skills, on digital, how we can extend the area of prosperity from the EU to this area. And the last point will be, as you said, is always a question of pull and push. We have to deal with the life of 150 million people. We live with the many challenges, but we remain open to enlargement, which is the best offer that you can find on foreign policy. It's not an FTA. We're giving membership, which is something that is maybe sometimes need to be also, let's say, articulated what it means, the membership. The contribute that you bring to the family. Certainly we need to work together. This is clear. I think yesterday there was some panel, I saw some, it was basically a Euro bashing exercise. All the culprits were in the EU, lack of leadership, waste of time. I think this is not the right approach to how you look at. We certainly have our own challenges. As you said, we have a public opinion to run. So it is not an easy one. But certainly we are ready to take our role responsibility and work with the leadership in Europe and in the region. So I think we will start to make a blame game. We are not going very far, because at the end of the way, its enlargement is in a unanimity. The accession treaty needs to be ratified in the 27 members parliament and in the European Parliament. So we want to have the people on board. So that's why we need to be clear what we want from us, what we want in this country to happen. We all know where the difficulties are. We know you mentioned rule of law. Rule of law is a problem everywhere. We have a problem of rule of law within the European Union. It's not a divide versus Western Balkans. This is not the way. But the question of interests and values that we want to have within the family need to be there. We need to be like-minded. The scenario, what will be the world in 10 years, who knows? We don't know. But what we need to be sure that the EU family is united on a set amount of principle and interest, and we are ready to fight hard to make it heard in the global arena. So we need to have members who really think and act as we think need to be done.
I think it's very well known that Austria is really a dedicated supporter of the EU enlargement process, and that's why we also reacted immediately and tried, and we worked together with Italy and other countries to come up with our own proposals for a new methodology. But the main reason was we wanted to contribute to inject some more dynamism into the EU enlargement process, but also to make sure that the EU unanimity can be reached on enlargement. We think the proposal by the Commission is very well balanced and a very good one. We have always been saying that EU enlargement deserves and requires the highest political attention, both in the European Union, but also here in the candidate countries. And I think this stronger political engagement that is envisaged is a great opportunity. And I think we are now in a state where I think there's really reason to believe that we are having a window of opportunity to really restart or accelerate the process. I think, as our colleagues have said, it is also our strong wish that accession negotiations be opened with Albania and North Macedonia in March, because we think that the Western Balkan Summit in Zagreb should really be used to have a very forward-looking and strategic discussion among EU leaders on enlargement.
Okay, now I'm sorry to say that we started late and that we have to end this right now because the ambassadors have another engagement, so there will be no questions and answers. I think we tried to cover as much as we could some of the problems in such a short span. Obviously, all of these issues are going to be discussed for a long time. We didn't really come to the bottom of any of this, but I think it's a great occasion to inform the audience on the dilemmas and the problems that the EU has. And obviously, I think I can speak for all of us here, at least in the Kopernik Forum, that we hope to be in the European Union, because the answer to whether you want to be in the European Union is really an answer of what kind of society do you want to live in. That's what it comes down to in the true sense of the word, and I think we wish the European Union to manage to adequately face all these challenges that are in front of her. So with that, let me thank the ambassadors for being here, our guests. Okay?